feed us here. It's actually just 6 o'clock. If we could go through the agenda as printed. Declarations of interest. Have we got any? No. Have we received any public questions at all? I don't think so.
None received, Chair.
No. Just to remind people that we're still in transition with the COVID. Probably none of us know really what the rules are, but the council is operating and telling people to be very cautious. Also that filming will take place. I don't think we have any members of the public that are present actually. Oh, sorry, we may have. And if anybody feels as though they don't want to be filmed, if they could let the committee clerk know. Okay. I'd just like to say, before we start the meeting and go into the details of the planning application, I'd just like to say a thank you really to Simon Roberry. This will be his last meeting with us. He's been acting as the interim head of planning for, I think it's since a year last January. And what's going to, I think he finishes it with Oldham on the 17th of August. And that also will then see a new team of senior officers coming into the planning system. There's an appointment, Mr. Nickman's still with us in another capacity, but there'll be 3 other officers, including a new head of planning, and they will start on the 17th of August. So what I intend to do is give people the details of the people, the new posts and the new responsibilities. But thank you very much, Simon. I think that you've steered a good ship in difficult circumstances, so thanks very much indeed for all your efforts. Thank you. Okay, if we could go on to applications. The first application we have received is for land at Booth Street, the old Sainsbury's site, which is proposed for a secondary school. And if I can ask the planning office to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, this is a site, and members obviously will know well, it's just down the road from where we're sitting at the moment. Proposal for a new school, new academy school, approximately 1,200 pupils to be accommodated on the site. So we'll just go quickly through the presentation, if I can get the technology to work. There we go. So again, this is just the aerial view of the site. So in the centre of the picture, as you can see, just adjacent to Oldham Way, with Middleton Road running along the northern side of the site, and the existing college and the school there as well. So there's an little kind of educational grouping that will come into play. Red edge boundary of the site. Again, as you can see there, the section that goes down to the bottom of the site, we'll come on to that a little bit later, which is part of the car parking area to the site, and the junctions adjacent to that part of the site as well will be subject to some changes as an element of the proposals. So again, now just some views of the site. As I say, you obviously be well aware of these. The site itself behind the trees on the left-hand side. This is just looking down as you go out of the town centre to the west. This is from the ring road looking towards the site, and again, you can see at the moment, largely vacant on there, fairly flat. There are some changes in level, but similar topography. A couple of views from inside the site itself, and then a few from the roadway. So this is Booth Street, and again, as I say, we'll have some commentary on that later. This will become one way through the site, and obviously will be the main point at which pupils would be dropped off in the morning, picked up in the evening. This is the junction down at Booth Street, which again, I say there will be some alterations to this. Bloom Street, similarly part of those alterations. And the site plans themselves, so to the building is the area to the towards the top that you can see. The block, kind of horizontal block, is the main building to the site. In the left-hand side of that coming down, you can see an area. This is the sports hall element of it, and the main school hall is the rectangular section that comes down on the right-hand side with a central court area. External sports facilities also on the site, and the main car parking area provided alongside Booth Street with accesses and egress onto Booth Street itself. The main building, this 4-storey structure, is designed with a kind of mill aesthetic to it. So this is the top one, is the main elevation, as you will see from Middleton Road as you come down into the site. The overall height and scale reflects the buildings opposite. Obviously it is quite a large contribution to the street scene. At the bottom end you've got the opposite view of that, and the smaller elements in the grey there. These are the sports hall and the main school hall, which have a more functional appearance to them. Side elevation views, so again, view from Booth Street at the top there with the side elevation showing the main entrance area into the school. That's the glazed area at the top, and then the opposite view as you look down from Oldham Way. These are just going through the floor plans. I appreciate obviously the scale of these is not going to be very helpful, but obviously you can work out the top area. These are the individual classrooms with a kind of central area for circulation into those. Again, up through the first floor, through the classroom areas, second floor and third floor. And now just a few perspective views taken from the submission. So this is the area, the main kind of circulation areas within the building, giving you that kind of sense of light and openness. This is the main hall within the building. And finally, for this section, just a perspective of the building itself as you look from Booth Street towards the main entrance to the site. So in terms of the proposal, clearly this is a positive contribution to educational provision within the borough. It satisfies local plan policy 2 in that sense, and also the MPPF at paragraph 94, which indicates that there should be a strong presumption towards proposals which support educational facilities and improvements to those facilities. It's obviously a mixed-used area on the edge of the town centre, and as such in a very sustainable location with obviously access to services within the town centre, Metrolink stations nearby, and obviously the bus station just at the top of the hill as well. So in terms of principle, this is an appropriate use for the site. In terms of the design, you've seen the presentation there, as I say, with the main building providing the main function of advertising, if you like, the school building as a positive contribution to the street scene. The buildings behind obviously have a more functional purpose, but do reflect some of the other buildings in the area, such as the sports hall, which is nearby as well. In terms of the suitability of the site, there's been discussions with various statutory undertakers in relation to drainage and ground conditions, and members will see from the report some of those issues are still outstanding, but not in the sense of objection, more in the sense of ongoing negotiations to ensure that there are appropriate schemes, such as the appropriate drainage scheme and dealing with the existing infrastructure under the site. In terms of ecology, the site's not within a designated protection area. No protected species have been identified on the site. There will be a loss of some trees on the site, but the reports into those, many of those are not of the highest quality. There will be some replacement planting on site, but as members will be aware from discussions at previous applications, there's a need to comply with Safe Policy D15, which would require replacement on a 3-for-1 basis of trees elsewhere on the site if they cannot be achieved on the site itself. So that's a conditional requirement of the application. In terms of those factors, again, the scheme is considered acceptable. Highways is obviously, you might have noticed, an area where I've not commented so far, and at which point I will pass over to my colleague Wendy Morehouse just to give you a little bit more detail on that aspect.
Thank you. The main thing with this school is the highly sustainable location. So we've tried to make any improvements necessary for pedestrians from the links, from the Metrolink stops at the bus station and the town centre. We know that some parents will still want to drive their children to school. So again, we've just tried to make the two obvious areas where they'll congregate as safe as possible for school children. And in this case, it's Booth Street, so there'll be improvements along Booth Street and Bloom Street. There's a secondary pedestrian access from Bloom Street. So we've attached a condition to ensure that a highway improvement scheme's carried out to make sure that that operates safely when parents discover that that is another secondary access and an area for them to wait for their children. Apart from that, I'll just answer any questions if anybody's got any afterwards.
Thank you very much indeed. Has anybody got any questions of the officers on the presentation that they've made? Councillor Allen down here.
Thank you. I see from the details that there's, it doesn't have the details of the cycle parking on site, but it does talk about that being planned. But I couldn't see details of cycle access to the site. Could you just let me know what's happening around that? Thank you.
So generally in the town centre, the cycle infrastructure is already there. There aren't any plans to improve the cycle infrastructure because it doesn't need to be improved to the site. So we want to make sure that within the site, we've got the location of the cycle storage facilities, but we want to make sure that the facilities are suitable for the users. So the staff and children will have slightly different needs. There will be a toucan crossing across Middleton Road. So I know I've just said the cycle infrastructure won't be improved, but actually that is an improvement. And that allows easier access from between the school and the college, but also to the nearby Metrolink stop.
Councillor Brownridge.
Yeah, can I just ask, was there any concern about air pollution in view of the proximity to the elevated section of the ring road? Has that been looked at all?
There has been a report submitted with the application. Obviously indicates that there's two elements obviously to air pollution. One is the impact of existing air pollution and resultant air pollution on the pupils themselves. That has been dealt with in the report to a satisfactory degree. Again, it's difficult for me to comment. I'm not a specialist in that particular subject. Similarly, given the sustainable nature of the location of the site, it's again considered that, and in particular compared to the previous use of the site, there will be a reduction in the amounts of pollutants resulting mainly, as we know, from vehicle traffic through there. But say in terms of the first one, really, I can't provide any more information than the report that had been submitted. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. I think Wendy mentioned about some schemes, maybe traffic schemes or something, or a contribution to that. Is there going to be anything done about the people when they drop the students off at the school, and so they don't hang about, you know, in the cars causing any pollution?
Well, I can answer the question from a purely highway safety point of view, not a pollution point of view, because I'm not a pollution expert. We've focused on the sustainability of this site, and there'll be a school travel plan to ensure that there's a plan in place to promote sustainable modes of transport. All the routes from those sustainable modes of transport are safe. We've got the widening of Booth Street, there'll be some parking provision short-term on Booth Street. There'll be a lay-by for a bus on Booth Street. And then the safe pedestrian and vehicular access from Bloom Street. There's a balance between encouraging parents to drive to the site, and we don't want to discourage them completely, because we've got to make sure the safety measures are there for when they do drive to site and when the children get out of the cars and then try to travel then on foot into the school. So there are highway safety measures that will be implemented, designed and constructed by the Council under a Section 278 agreement.
At this stage, could I invite Mr. Thornham on behalf of the applicant to speak? You have 3 minutes, Mr. Thornham.
Sorry, Chair, I have had my hand up a while.
I'm sorry, Ed.
Thank you. Mine is back to the traffic, to be honest. And I just wondered, obviously we haven't got any pictures of the 278 agreement yet, have we, Wendy? Did I miss that reading? Because I didn't see them.
We have got an idea of, so the drawing on the screen now shows broadly the improvements on Booth Street. And that's the idea we've got for Bloom Street. So it stops the right turning out of and into Bloom Street. So you're not crossing 4 lanes of traffic. So when I said before about discouraging parents, we're making it difficult for them to think about using Bloom Street, but we're making it safe because they've got to travel to it so they can turn left in and left out.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Thornham.
Thank you, Chair. I'm here on behalf of Wilmot Dixon Construction, who are supporting the Department of Education in bringing forward these proposals for the new Brian Clark Academy. Our teams work closely with the planning officers to bring these proposals to you, and we fully support the recommendation for approval of the application. The Brian Clark C of E Academy is supported by the Cranmer Education Trust, who already successfully operate the Blue Coat Academy in Oldham. The proposals will secure much needed additional school places for 1,200 secondary level students in the borough, and will also provide employment for at least 120 full-time equivalent members of staff. The Trust has an excellent reputation for the education provision in the town, and the Academy will support the Council's local plan objectives to promote Oldham as a university town. The National Planning Policy Framework sets out a presumption in favour of creating sustainable school places to meet need, and states that significant weight should be attached to the creation of such places. The application is for new teaching facilities in an accessible location within the urban area, which will fully comply with the national and local planning objectives of enhancing education provision. The site's been selected following an extensive search exercise, and the proposals secure the redevelopment of this brownfield former supermarket site in the town centre. The site represents an extension of the educational quarter to the north of Middleton Road and is a highly sustainable location with strong bus and tram links. The connection with the adjacent educational facilities will be strengthened through the provision of a new pedestrian crossing point across Middleton Road, which also allows students and staff to safely access tram connections. The scheme will deliver a high-quality, modern facility which provides not only state-of-the-art classroom space, but also excellent outdoor sports and play facilities. The proposed design makes efficient use of the site to meet a range of educational standards and also provide a landmark building to the corner of Booth Street and Middleton Road. The proposals have evolved following detailed discussions with officers. The building is designed to minimise energy consumption, supporting the Council's climate change objectives, and will enhance the appearance of the site through boundary landscaping and tree planting, including additional off-site tree planting in accordance with local plan policies. The site will be accessible by sustainable modes of transport, and the layout provides staff parking and pupil drop-off, as well as servicing arrangements, electric vehicle charge points and cycle parking. The application has been expediently processed by officers in order to present the scheme to you at this time. It'll be necessary for us to make an immediate start on site if planning permission is granted in order to meet the needs of the 2022-23 school intake, and we hope that you will be able to support the proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thornham. Has anybody got any questions of Mr. Thornham? Okay, no questions. So the item's open for debate or comment. Councillor Davis.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, it looks a really good, I mean, it's connected to Bluecoat, which is a successful school. It seems a win-win. You know, we need more school places, so, I mean, subject to anybody else making any comments, I'd like to, if I can move for approval. But subject, obviously, anyone else got anything to say?
Thank you. It's been moved for approval. Is that seconded?
I'll second it.
Councillor Brownridge seconded that. Has anybody got any comments before we move to the vote? Okay, it's been moved for approval. All those in favour of approval with the conditions, please show. Okay, I make that unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. If we move on to the next application, which is the final application, which is an outline planning permission for Shaw Distribution Centre. Mr. Dickman.
Okay, once again, just checking the technology's in line with me. Right, this is a pretty major application, really. It's quite a large site. Obviously, in terms of the township of Shaw, it's a very important development and will result in a considerable change to the existing townscape. Obviously, have impacts in relation to the economy of the area and so forth. So it's an application for, it's a site currently used, or at least in part currently used, for distribution purposes. That follows the departure of one of the main companies on the site in the recent past. The company that is currently still on site, Yodel, they're due to depart from the site in 2024. So therefore, there is an issue about what will happen to this, given its location, given the types of buildings on the site, and so forth. So as you can see, or you will be able to see now, the site is fairly centrally located. The town centre itself is just around the area to the left of the Red Edge site. So it's centrally located. The Metrolink tram line basically runs past the site with a tram stop, the main town centre stop, adjacent to one corner of the site itself. This is just giving an indication. A couple of things just to mention on this, which is more of a close-up. What you can see quite clearly is how much of the site is effectively developed. And that's not just in terms of the buildings, which themselves are a mix of late 18th century, early 19th century traditional mill buildings, but a couple of very, very large, more modern contemporary warehouse buildings, and the additional large areas of hard standing that make up much of the site. The area around the kind of right-hand side, the eastern side of the site, where you can see some greenery, effectively is the River Beal. Obviously a clue there with the name on the site. But as you'll see some of the photographs, for significant chunks of the site, it does go in culvert on the site. I think this is worth mentioning this because one of the main benefits of the site will be related to flood relief, and there are areas in flood zones 2 and 3 within the site. The scheme itself will involve effectively the opening up of the river and creation of open areas around the site. So that has other benefits as well. But certainly in terms of the character of the site, the amount of hard standing, amount of impervious surface in there is a benefit from the change. This is just to give you an easier view, and it gives you an indication of the main buildings on the site itself. And again, some of the views. So even where we've got the more traditional mill buildings, there are more modern structures that have been built in to obviously meet the modern needs of the businesses on the site itself. So the mills don't stand in the landscape kind of in isolation. They are mixed in with some quite substantial, more modern and let's say less visually appealing buildings that are on the site, but are more obviously functional. These give you more of a view in relation to the river itself, and you can see some of the elements of the channel in which it currently flows and the elements in which it's culverted throughout the site. These are now some just views, and these are the existing views of the site, but will largely, I mean, this is an outline application, so apart from the access details, everything else, members be aware, that will be reserved for future indication, but these are just to give you some indication of the access facilities within the site. At the moment, that's the secondary area from Linear Lane, the main access from Beale Lane, and this is a proposed emergency access point again into the site. So again, this is just showing demolition. So again, this is the main buildings. You can see what's involved in that element. And then this is indicative. So again, we can't take this particular layout and configuration as being formal part of the application, but it's to give an indication of how, once the river is opened up through the site, that will form an important part of the landscaping and the environmental improvement, with other areas of open space linked in with that, access improvements to the site linking into neighbouring footpath networks on the site as well. So this is an important element of the benefits of the scheme. As I say, the site is partly still occupied as an employment site. It is designated as a business employment site on the local plan, and as a result, Policy 14 requires that where development is proposed which doesn't fall within the acceptable uses which are set out, which are generally the employment uses, that it's necessary for the applicant to demonstrate that they have looked at the viability of alternative uses on the site, looked at whether it is possible to maintain existing buildings on the site, and as part of that there's been significant information provided by the applicant, and that has been independently assessed on behalf of the council by experts in that particular field. You'll notice on the late list there's just an indication, because in the main report that was being finalised by Kepi Massey. You'll see on there that they've given some final indications now of their views that the submitted information is effectively a robust summary of the future likelihood of the site being utilised for employment uses. It does nevertheless point out that the amount of information submitted in terms of marketing information and so on by the applicant doesn't fully follow the requirements of the policy. Parts of that's quite obvious, which is that part of the site is still currently occupied, but it is clear that in the not too distant future that occupier will move away from the site. The nature of the scale of buildings on the site and presumptions you can make about future uses that could possibly take place in terms of employment, they are really important. There are some old mills on the site, none of them are listed, however, they are of local heritage importance in the area. And we have asked the applicant to look at the potential for conversion and retention of at least one of those mills on the site. They have looked at that. That indicates that there is a lack of viability for that. And again, in terms of, you see on the late list, a significant element of that has been demonstrated to be accurate. We know from elsewhere in the borough how difficult it can be sometimes to get productive uses of these buildings. It also has to be said that even if you were to manage to retain a mill on the site, given the scale of it, given its relationship with the surrounding areas, that in itself could have some implications for how you could develop around the site. So you've got issues, for instance, with privacy of neighbouring gardens being overlooked by apartments on the site. So it's on the negative side, it doesn't comply with policy 14. However, we have to look beyond that to, well, realistically, by keeping the site in its employment use and there being a high likelihood of no take-up for replacement on the site, are we going to end up with a problem? Are we going to end up with a site that's going to fall into rack and ruin on the site? On the positive element of this, of course, the thing members are totally aware of, we have a lack of a 5-year housing land supply across the borough. We also have a lot of pressure for greenfield site developments to make up on that. This is obviously a brownfield site. It's in a highly sustainable location. We have to be careful not to jump to the conclusion that, you know, it's a proposal for up to 400 houses, we're going to get 400 houses coming forward, and that means it takes all the pressure away. Obviously, a development of that scale is going to take, if approved, it's going to take some time to come to fruition. And as we know, part of it won't be able to come to fruition for at least 3 years in any case on the site. That obviously adds to issues because for part of the site, you are going to have a relationship between employment uses still on the site and new residential. And we're going to have to look at that very carefully as part of any reserved matters applications and how the development comes forward subsequently. But quite clearly, there is a benefit there. There's a 20% affordable housing contribution being put forward on the site. It is a highly sustainable location. You're right next to the tram track. You're right next to the town centre. Those factors in themselves in terms of sustainability should reduce the potential for development, for vehicle movements and so on to come forward. So those main elements, I think, are the contradictory ones, which is loss of employment, loss of heritage value, but you might also argue you're losing some from, you know, unless you're a modernist architecturally, some eyesores that are, you know, also on the site in terms of the more modern architecture that's in there. In terms of other factors, and we've talked about briefly about the flood risk elements of it, there are ecological benefits of the site as well of opening up the River Beal and the possibilities there of some biodiversity enhancement in connection with that. In terms of the existing ecology elements of it, again, ground conditions, drainage, all these aspects have been dealt with by statutory undertakers and subject to the conditions. There have been no objections raised in terms of those elements of it. So it is a balanced judgment of those main elements. In terms of highways, there's a balanced judgment there as well. Clearly 400 houses, it does have some potential to generate additional car traffic in the area, but that's weighed up against the fact that you've currently got a considerable potential for HGV traffic, which to get to the main strategic highway network has to travel through primarily residential areas. So you weigh up again the benefits of those. So there are some policy negatives in terms of this. There are some significant benefits. The new housing, ecological, open space benefits, flood risk improvements across the site. And it's on that basis that we're recommending approval. It will come forward over a long period of time. And in terms of viability, because we've not got a detailed scheme, we can't give accurate figures of what would be proposed. What I think we will be clear on is that viability, so in terms of what's being demanded for education, health and so forth, it's highly unlikely that the scheme will be able to put forward that. But in terms of the Section 106 agreement, that will have to have review mechanisms in there. So when we get the first reserved matters application, that will allow us to re-look at the situation in terms of how viable is the site going to be. Is the current submission still appropriate? And again, this could be a development over a number of years. Things could change. as it comes forward, it may well be market values in the area actually increase, and that means that the site itself possibly could provide more contributions. So we need to make sure that we're not taking 2001 for something that might be 2021, might be 2027 when it's finished, or sometime after that. The economic situation, the financial system might have changed. So if members have any queries on that, there really are, there are indications now of what those figures are likely to be, but the precise figures are likely to change over time. Subject to that agreement being signed, we are obviously recommending approval subject to a number of conditions, as you'll see within the recommendation. Beyond that, as I say, members got any queries, we'll try and answer them. Thank you.
Councillor Brownridge, we're up to questions now with the planning officer. Councillor Brownridge.
Thank you. Can you just clarify the 106 agreement? Is it going to be signed now and then reviewed? How is that the mechanism actually going to work?
Right, it will need to be, so the recommendation is obviously to approve subject to that legal agreement.
Sorry, that was my question,
sorry.
because it doesn't actually refer to the 106 in the recommendation. I couldn't find it. It refers to it in the report, but not when it comes. It's just a load of conditions. So I was a bit confused about that. That's why I asked, really.
Yeah, sorry, it's the way we've rejigged the reports. It's at the beginning. We used to have them at the end. We actually, we now put it. So we have the conditions at the end. But the actual report, so after the introduction...
That's my fault, I have to admit. I think
that was Simon's innovation.
Well, I apologise. I obviously didn't read it properly, so I do apologise. So the 106 will be signed now before the outline consent's actually issued? Yes, okay, thank you very much.
And as I say, that will be worded in such a way that there's a review mechanism that will go forward.
Thanks, Chair. There were several things that they were contributing to in this development, but you mentioned 20% affordable housing. What form would that be? I mean, what does it mean, actually, affordable housing? I mean, because obviously, we've got new members on here to explain to them, and of course, millions of viewers watching us on the internet, so.
I think, again, it's difficult to precisely say what that will be at the moment because we don't know the makeup of development on the site. So it will be dictated subsequently. But there's likely to be a mix of obviously rent-to-buy type properties, there'll be rental properties and so forth. But that will be dictated by obviously what the demand is in the area. So again, it's the same answer really to some extent because we're only dealing with an outline principle. The details of that will come forward over time. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Gloucester.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just interested in this scoot loop allocation of 13,420. I'm just concerned that it talks about TFGM. So could you tell me exactly what that would be spent on, please?
So it's for the revalidation of the scoot system. So when the development comes into use, making sure that all the surrounding traffic signalised junctions are working to cope with the different capacities.
Can I come back, Chair, on that? So would that actually be insured? That doesn't go into a pot for the whole of Oldham or anything?
No,
it's definitely in the vicinity of the development?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Councillor Alalami.
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of the Section 106 agreements and the figures that are in there, and also sort of the affordable housing calculation, because that was part of the viability calculation, there's a lot of information in here that seems to be very provisional. So, for example, talking about the trees, and it was saying we're not at a stage where we know how many trees need to be replaced. So there's obviously a lot of work still to be done in various areas. So in terms of them working out that viability and how those figures have been come to, is that done on a best case scenario? Is that done on an averaging scenario? And realistically looking at other applications that have come forward similarly, are we, what percentage of applications with that type of Section 106 do we actually get that on? Thank you.
Well, the assessments will be based on generalised criteria. They have to be on, so there's other examples. So you'll see practically what market values are, for instance, in this area, in other areas, what trends might be coming forward, what the costs are of developing the site, what the costs are of remediating the site. So obviously qualified surveyors are involved, amongst others, in providing that information. But obviously you've got to make some assumptions at this stage as to what that will be, and you met that comparative. So for instance, in terms of the assessment of that Kepi Massey undertook, they've looked at that and they've said, well, we think this might be a little bit too low. We think that might be you might be thinking your costs are a little bit higher than they might be. Your values of your properties, we actually think you might get more value for that property. So they've got to make those assessments of it and then look at how robust the information that's been put forward by the applicant is likely to be. And that's where there's always going to be an element of uncertainty in that, because you're not dealing with a definitive site. But you've still got to make it, if you're making your assessments about whether to develop the site, you've got to use criteria. You may find that there's extra costs come about once you start doing your assessments of how much it'll cost you to decontaminate part of the site. Obviously, it's got a long-standing industrial history to it. So as I say, outlines are always difficult from that perspective, particularly on a big site like this. But it's obviously based on industry standards and industry criteria and assessments by suitably qualified professionals in that field.
Yes, Mr. Rover.
Thank you. Yeah, perhaps if I can just add to that, Chair, if I may. Yeah, if we were dealing with a full application, we would know exactly how many dwellings, we'd know what length of roadway, how much landscaping, type of landscaping, etc. And we would be looking at a viability appraisal that would be worked out using what's called the comparative method, which would look at similar residential floor space per square metre. The one that sort of comes to mind recently was the former courthouse application, where we had all the information and we were able to look at that, test the viability appraisal on the basis of the comparative per square metre sales values that they put up, etc. Build costs, you get that from the standard RICS, or building construction industry indices, so those are all established. You know how many square metres, you know what the net to gross floor area ratios are, etc. So you can get something which is pretty firm, and you then test that. And you have a sensitivity analysis which usually tests what happens if the values go up by up to 5% or reduce by up to 10%, it's plus or minus 10%, and the same with costs. So you'll have a matrix which will show what the impact of that is on viability. As Graham said, the problem we've got is this is an outline. So we're making assumptions. So what we have to do is because we need to have a 106 signed at the outline stage, we need to build into that the flexibility that enables us to capture any overage. When we do get the detailed schemes in, clearly we will be basically polishing that agreement, using the flexibility that's built into it to ensure that we're capturing the contributions that we should. But there's there are pros and cons with dealing with a full and with an outline. With a full, you're often nailed down, and it's more difficult to argue overage clauses, although I would argue we should be. But when it comes, so sometimes the lack of flexibility means that if the values go up, you don't capture that. But with an outline, we have to make more assumptions, and we have to ensure that we're building in flexibility both ways. I hope that hasn't doubly confused everybody.
Councillor Gloucester.
Yeah, can I just ask if these numbers are included in the places for everyone that we're considering next week?
not in terms of site allocation, as far as I'm concerned, but they would be considered in the in the housing trajectory. So broadly, they have been taken account of, yes.
Is there any further questions of the officers? If not, we've got a speaker on behalf of the applicant, Mr. Stinton.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members of the committee. I'm here to speak on behalf of the applicant, Estuary Park Property Holdings Limited, in relation to the proposals for up to 400 new homes at the former Shore Distribution Centre. I'd like to thank officers for their hard work and rigour in assessing the planning application and welcome their positive recommendation that outline planning permission be granted. The site represents a prime opportunity to deliver a significant quantum of new homes on brownfield land, securing the public benefits which go along with that. The design team have taken a contextual approach, and the proposed scheme is informed by planning policy, technical and commercial considerations. This is including assessing the potential retention and conversion of the vacant mills on site. However, through robust testing, viability and market feasibility, it's ultimately been determined that the retention would be unviable. Following a comprehensive review of the evidence submitted, Kepi Massey and the council officers verified this position. A comprehensive redevelopment option focused on the delivery of new family homes has been pursued, seeking to maximise regeneration benefits in line with council ambitions. The applicant has sought to actively engage with council officers, key stakeholders, including Environment Agency and TFGM, and local ward councillors over the past 12+ months. A comprehensive public consultation event was undertaken in November. As part of this, over 5,000 letters were distributed to nearby properties, and a dedicated website was created providing information on the proposals. This garnered 4,000 visits to the website, with 155 feedback forms being completed. The response was overwhelmingly supportive, with many agreeing on the need for new family homes and maximising the use of brownfield land. A number of letters of support have also been received by the council during determination. The application has been subject to robust scrutiny by officers and other statutory consultees, and all technical matters have been addressed subject to condition and Section 106 agreement. The proposed development represents sustainable development and will secure a number of significant benefits. These include securing up to 400 new homes, of which 20% are affordable, meeting an identified need, providing a substantial contribution toward the council's 5-year housing land supply, boosting the local economy through the creation of direct construction jobs and additional employment in the supply chain, including opportunities for local apprenticeships, generating additional council tax and new homes bonus payments, the deculverting and opening up of the River Bill, reducing flood risk on site and in the vicinity, with the final development constituting Flood Zone 1 on completion, delivering at least 3.2 hectares of usable and managed open space, including biodiversity enhancements, removing existing opportunities for antisocial behaviour associated with the vacant mill buildings on site, and finally making a £2.2 million contribution towards healthcare, education and management of open space to be secured via Section 106 agreement. In closing, the scheme will deliver significant public benefits which will demonstrably outweigh any potential adverse impacts. As such, it is respectfully requested that members consider the application favourably in line with officers' recommendations and grant planning permission for this key regeneration scheme. Thank you.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions? Councillor Alan Downer.
Thank you. Sorry, you just mentioned a £2.2 million contribution. Yeah, rather less than it says in the paper. So you said 2.2 million. We've got 2.472 million towards education, or 1.2 million towards health. It does worry me when the amount of Section 106 money goes down by that much in that shorter time.
Sorry. That was requested. That wasn't the figure we've agreed. So that was the responses from consultees. So we have gone through a process in terms of, so it's 2.2, yeah.
Councillor Gloucester.
Did you say SD Park Property Holdings? Are they actually the developer?
They're the landlord of the site. They own the site. So
when did they purchase that site?
It was a long time ago. I think they bought it from Littlewoods.
Right, so they're not planning to sell the site on for development? That's the question I'm asking.
I act on behalf of the applicant, who is the owner of the site. Following that, there will be discussions about what happens in terms of its development moving forward.
That's a yes, that's it.
Yes.
Sorry, can I just remind members that who the applicant is not a material planning consideration? Thank you.
Councillor Gloucester.
I know we've talked about a long time. There's currently a development which is of about, I can't remember the exact number, but that's actually taken 10 years to come to fruition. So what would you see as the earliest development opportunity for it to actually start and us to see houses on that land?
So as part of the application, we've submitted a phasing plan. So we consider that the site will come forward in 2 distinct phases. So you've got the northern portion of the site, which is currently vacant, and you've obviously got the southern portion of the site, which is occupied by Yodel. So we would anticipate, subject to approval and going through the reserve matters process, that we'd be looking to work on the first section of the site, which is the northern portion, as soon as possible, I believe. I can't give any further timescales, I'm afraid, sorry.
I've received no further indications or questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Councillor Gloucester. Chris Gloucester, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm just speaking as a ward member for Shaw. Broadly speaking, we welcome this development because it's a good development of a brownfield site. However, as Mr Dickman explained, it is a major development. It is in the centre of Shaw Town Centre, and there's obviously issues in relation to the influx, shall we say, of up to 400 homes and anything between 800 or 1,600 new residents, many young family residents. So the greatest concern for ward members and the greatest concern for the community is the impact that these additional homes will have on the provision of health and education in the community, which is, as we know, currently stretched, with local people already having to attend medical and educational facilities outside Shaw and Crompton already. 400 new homes will bring more footfall to the town centre, which can only be good for local traders. But the council needs to recognise that health, education and leisure facilities are lacking in Shaw, and there's also a very clear message which came out of the public consultation, which I actually commend the Chris Hinton and his team for, because it was a really well publicised public consultation, and the issues of concern that the community raised, and which the report also raises, are well established. There's absolutely no doubt that there needs to be something done about health and education in Shaw and Crompton, particularly if this development comes to fruition. What's caused me grave concern tonight is, as Mr Hinton said, he has been in consultation with ward councillors as late as yesterday, actually. And the figures that are in the report to the committee and the figures that we are aware of via the developers are 2 completely different things. And Sam Al-Hamdani picked up on it. And I would say that that is definitely something that the officers need to address with this committee now. But I will just finish on saying that, broadly speaking, we welcome the development. It's a good use of the land. However, it's conditional to health, education and leisure facilities in Shaw. There being a commitment to those being improved prior to an influx of extra people to the neighbourhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we have some clarity on the amount of 106 money in relation to health and education, just so everybody's on the same page?
In terms of health and education, there is a commitment from the applicant to obviously put forward a financial contribution, and as Graham pointed out earlier, it's very difficult to specify what that financial contribution will be at this stage. So that's why as the Section 106 progresses, there's going to be a number of reappraisal clawbacks in the Section 106 to ensure that when the development comes forward, we essentially get an appropriate level of contribution subject to viability. So that's something that the council will make sure that we're on top of during them discussions.
Councillor Allen-Darnley.
Sorry, yeah, because it was my confusion asking the question, and you said exactly what you have said in this paper. But what are we signing? The recommendation says completion of a Section 106 agreement. The consultations say we've asked for, on those elements, 1.2 million and 2.472, and it says that they've offered 2.2 million. What are we agreeing to when we say yes to a Section 106 agreement?
I think the answer is that we're not actually agreeing to a figure. That's the point. I think what we're saying is that the viability appraisals that have been undertaken indicate that the site is likely, using various criteria, as Mr. Roby set out, an amount of money. So that will be what the site, for it to be viable, otherwise developer walks away, we don't get a development on the site. The costs of providing all the necessary infrastructure and services, including elements such as education, for which a lot of finance is national, so it's not just the local contribution to that, and obviously the local education authority will look to the centre to provide for increases and funding of that. The developer, quite rightly, should make their contribution to that. But we always have to weigh that up alongside, well, if we were to say that, and members know this from previous examples, we say you need to contribute this, this, this and this, that comes to X. If a developer says, well, if I pay you X, there's no point developing it because it's not viable. And this is, as we know, it's a site where there's going to be a lot of infrastructure works need doing on it. You know, the opening up of the river, a lot of costs potentially involved in that, demolishing the buildings that are on site, a lot of costs involved in that. It's been an industrial site for, 200 years or so. There could be contamination on the site that needs dealing with. So the start point's going to be, well, it's going to cost me to do all that. If the return on the development is not going to be worthwhile because we've said, well, you're going to have to pay all this, you have to pay all this. That's the financial situation we're in when you deal with any development of a site. So there's not a utopian outcome to that. There is an outcome where you've got to say, well, there will be benefit, there will be a financial improvement, which will go to health and education, to the open space, for instance, that's being provided on the site, that's going to obviously then be usable to the wider community, not just to the residents on this site. All those improvements to the shops in the area of the additional, the amount of money that's going to be spent in all that all has to come into play. The problem with an outline application, as we keep saying, is that there's no definitive answer. You can't say, the amount of council tax you're going to get from that property is this and this, the amount of vehicles that are going to come from that house, because it might be a smaller house type, might be a larger family house. All those are up in the air, and really an outline, you're looking at the principle of it. Would the use of the site, with the negatives and the positives, it's the balance. That's why planning is not a science in that sense. You've got to weigh all them things up, and our recommendation is that the benefits that come from that development are going to outweigh, on balance, the fact there's some negatives.
Mr. Aubrey.
Can I just, can I just help to further clarify, and Graham, Steve, correct me if I'm leading members up the garden path anyway with this, but what I understand is that clearly, you know, with an application like this, we go out to consultees, for example, education. They come back with a requirement of what they would like. And my understanding is that those first figures we're discussing was effectively the bid from consultees. This was then considered by the applicants. The applicants effectively viability tested the site and came up with the numbers that are at the top of page 33. Those, that's kind of the benchmark viability for the scheme. That has subsequently been tested by Kepiamasi as an independent party, who have confirmed that as things stand at the moment, that is a reasonable basis of Section 106 contributions. But what we have obviously done is built in the flexibility and the review mechanism so that when reserve matters applications come in, those benchmark figures, the proportion of affordable housing and the 2.2 million, can then be reassessed on an ongoing way as the development permissions, the reserve matters get approved. That's my reading of it, and that's correct, Steve?
That's correct. The figures that have come from the consultees haven't been viability tested in the same way as there's the figures that have come from CBRE.
Okay, if anybody understands that, but basically this is an indicative figure that will be made substantial when there's a full planning application in. And it may well be, for instance, if there's a full planning application, as an example, house prices in Shaw have actually gone up 18% in the last 4 months or so. Now, it could well be if that trend carries on, the contribution from 106 will be greater rather than less. So you can only make that assessment, as I understand it, once and when we get a substantive application, and then there'd be a proper nailed-on figure about that. Councillor Gloucester.
Yes, I am sorry, it is a 106 question again, because I've never seen an application of this size previously. So when the developer or the man speaking for the developer talks about stages, is the 106 then received in stages? Or is it all received at the beginning, or is it all received at the end? Because obviously if it's for healthcare and education, then there seems to be a little bit of disparity there for me.
If I may, Chair. What normally happens with Section 106 is particularly large 106 payments is there's a series of triggers which are usually number of dwellings either completed or occupied, and that will trigger a proportion of that payment. So it's not ideal. I mean, we'd all love to get the 106 payments up front, and therefore, the education that it's paying for, the education capital facilities that have been paid for, could be paid for up front, etc. But unfortunately, because of the impact that would have on the developer's cash flow, it's just not possible, and no authority really aspires to get upfront Section 106 payments. So, normal practice across England is that they're staged with these trigger points, and then we monitor them as a local authority. And usually, the critical point is there are clawback provisions that if we don't claim them within a particular time and or spend them within a particular time, the developer can reclaim them. So it's very important that we monitor, and we do here, we do monitor very well the Section 106 triggers and payments.
Have we got any more contributions? Councillor Browning.
Yeah, it's just a comment. I mean, clearly this is, this is going to be a really good development in terms of contribution to housing numbers. I suppose my comment is I'm disappointed that the employment assessment wasn't more robust, because I think inevitably that the need to find housing land is going to take huge priority, and we know we also have a great shortage of good quality employment land, and we know we're releasing greenbelt land to deal with that. So I do appreciate it's a difficult balancing exercise, but I suppose I'm slightly concerned that our need for housing is going to always outweigh a robust consideration of the employment merits of the existing site. I think in this case I don't feel so strongly about it because it clearly is right in the middle of a very built-up residential area and causes traffic problems because it's not really ideal for an employment site. But as a general principle, I think we do have to be careful that we make a really robust assessment of employment potential because it doesn't carry the same weight in the planning system as housing land does, and that is a problem, I think. So I don't object to this, it's just a general point.
Councillor Woodbine.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. The people of Crompton will probably be pig sick when they find out we've approved this. However, I do support building on brownfield sites, so I will support the application. It's always a shame to lose pieces of our industrial heritage, but it's even an even greater shame to lose greenbelt. So when we can build on brownfield sites and that opportunity arises, I think we should grab the bull with both horns, and the officers will be glad to hear I agree with them this time. Thank you.
Are there any more comments or anything? If not, I'll move approval with the conditions outlined within the report. Is that seconded? Councillor says second that. Has anybody got any further comments? Okay. Pardon?
Comments?
Yeah. Councillor Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah. I agree with you both. It's been approved and seconded. It's a good project. It fits in with the council's policy of building on brownfield sites. It'll eventually become a farmer mill site when they pull down. So it all fits in with that. Save the greenbelt land. So it's a win-win for everybody and good quality housing.
Thank you. Any further comments? If not, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour of the for approval? So that's 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those against? Those sitting on the fence abstaining, sorry. 2. Thank you. And that concludes the business of the evening. Go home and sweat it out.